President Biden today will host several Democratic governors in a virtual call to discuss the next steps in safeguarding abortion rights at the state level. The meeting follows the Supreme Court's ruling last week to overturn Roe v. Wade and the immediate response from Republican-controlled states to enact stricter bans on abortion, some of them immediately with trigger laws. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas and the co-founder and CEO of the group All In Together, Lauren Leader. Great to have you both with us. Congresswoman, I want to begin with you and just take Kansas, your state, as a snapshot of what's happening there. The Supreme Court upheld a couple of years ago there in your state the right to an abortion, but there is something on the ballot coming up next month that could change that.
Yeah, that's right. So currently, the Kansas legislature is barred from passing laws that would place an undue burden on people seeking reproductive health care services. But we have a constitutional amendment on the ballot on August 2nd. And, this is so important as Kansans have watched our neighboring states like Missouri pass some very extreme laws, total bans that would criminalize people seeking health care. And similar proposals have been introduced in Kansas previously, but were blocked by our Constitution. And so, we're doing everything we can to beat back this constitutional amendment that would really not just pave a path for those extreme proposals, but essentially create a highway to those extreme bans. And Kansans have made their voices heard multiple times that this is not the direction we want to go.
So this, Congresswoman, is a case study for what's happening across the country for a lot of people fighting for abortion rights. As you say, if this passes, it's possible that someone who is raped or who is the victim of incest would have to deliver that baby. What is your recourse here? What can activists do? What can members of Congress do? What can regular people who want to protect these rights do in their hometowns, in their home states?
Yeah, well, I can tell you here in Kansas, so many people are working to make sure that, on August 2nd, that everybody knows that this constitutional amendment is on our ballot and to vote no, because we don't want to eliminate constitutional rights. Kansas is the free state, and we have fought long and hard to make sure that we continue to be so. And I think that making sure that our neighbors, that folks know that we're going to be the first place in the country to have voters speak on this specific issue and make their voices heard, and make sure that everybody knows it's not okay to take away our rights. It's not okay for politicians to be trying to insert themselves into our healthcare decisions, our reproductive healthcare decisions. And it's not okay to have these extreme bans on access to the full range of reproductive health care services, including abortion and contraception. And I think that is I cannot overstate the importance of this constitutional amendment we have on the ballot on August 2nd.
Congresswoman, there's quite a lot of concern around the country amongst Democrats that I've spoken to that come November, when it's a few months after the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe, and at a time when Americans are really struggling economically with inflation, with high gas prices, that actually other issues might be more important, and those other issues might favor Republican candidates in the midterm elections. Is that what makes the amendment, this amendment in Kansas, so interesting to look at? Partly because it's sooner, it's in August, but also because it's specifically on the issue of abortion, and so you're going to be able to gauge the kind of temperature, if you want, of how many people turn out to vote on that one single issue in this amendment.
I think the importance of the August primary that we have here in Kansas is, absolutely, it's going to help us see how many people are really willing to step up and fight for people to be able to make their own decisions about their health care without the intervention of, frankly, some pretty extreme politicians. But I also think that, as it relates to this issue being on the ballot in August, it is also on the ballot in November, along with so many other things. You mentioned the costs of everything going up, whether we're talking about gas or things at the grocery store, if you can get your hands on things. And I think that, you know, while people are very, very upset, people are scared, people are frustrated and angry about the decision of the Supreme Court to overturn Roe, I also think that people continue to be very concerned and frankly frustrated about the rising cost of gas, about the costs at the grocery store. And I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive in any way. I think that people are very concerned about all of it.
At the end of the day, inflation may trump everything. You mentioned November. We should point out that your opponent, it's a rematch. You defeated this Republican, Ms. Adkins, 2 years ago. Running against you again this year, she is against abortion even in cases of rape and incest, and has advocated for the defunding of Planned Parenthood. So I'm sure we'll be talking to you much more as we go forward. Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas, thanks so much for being with us. Enjoy the holiday weekend. We appreciate your time today.
You too.
So, Lauren, let's talk about some of the polling that you've looked at in this issue, and whether this abortion, to Caddy's question, abortion may in fact galvanize voters. Does it energize people on either side or on both sides to go out to the polls in November?
Yeah, so we have new polls that we're releasing this morning that is actually really the only longitudinal polls that have been done looking specifically at the Roe question. We polled Americans in September, and then we polled them again just this week and asked this critical question about whether or not the decision to overturn Roe is motivating to turn out at the polls. And what we found is that absolutely it is motivating among Democratic women, independent women, and it is especially motivating among young women. And this is where we saw the most dramatic increase in the commitment, the sort of very committed, to voting in November. This is enormously important because Democratic motivation for the midterms has been depressed, as we've spoken about on this show, and many polls have shown, including ours. Young voter motivation for the midterms has been depressed, and we found a 26-point increase in the number of young women, particularly, who say that they are very motivated to turn out at the polls in November, specifically because of the abortion ban.
So, Lauren, I spent some time last week with an abortion provider in Pennsylvania, and she spoke about how this was motivating women to turn out and vote in the midterm elections. But she also raised something else that I thought was interesting that I hadn't really thought about, which is that this is also a motivator on the conservative side, on the Republican side as well. And I wonder, in your breakdown of those numbers, particularly with the young women, I'm assuming most of those are going to vote in favor of keeping abortion rights, but are you seeing indications too that this could spur voters on in the conservative movement because they want to get to a place where there is a national ban on abortion, and they feel this is not the end of this is just the first step in that direction?
Right, and we did look at that, and there is very little difference in terms of the motivation for Republican voters going into the midterms from a few months ago, meaning that the abortion, the change in the Supreme Court ruling has not actually measurably changed the motivation of Republicans. Now, their motivation was higher to begin with, but that's why this is so significant, that it is galvanizing for Democrats, and especially galvanizing for Democratic women and independent women, and that is critical. That is the coalition of voters that flipped the elections in 2018 and in 2020. And if Democrats are to maintain the majority in 2022, that is the most critical voting bloc. We also saw a significant increase in the motivation of Black women. These are voting blocs that obviously vote consistently on the Democratic side. So this is extremely significant. I think it shows that the Roe issue, clearly other issues, as you said, issues like inflation will matter, and it's hard to know. We'll be tracking this over the summer to what extent that overshadows the abortion issue. But if Democrats were looking for a galvanizing issue going into the 2022 midterms, this is it.
And in the immediate aftermath of the ruling last Friday, that's exactly what Speaker Pelosi and President Biden said. If you don't like this, go out and vote this fall. CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, with some fascinating new polls. Lauren, thanks so much. Good to see you. Still ahead, new concerns.